welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the newest film on VOD, The Craft Legacy. Before we begin, let me know in the comments if you were looking forward to this or what your thoughts were if you've seen it already, and make sure to give this a thumbs up if you like these reviews. It helps me out immensely if you do that. Also, if you're new here and you like movies, whether it be blockbusters, hidden gems, or everything in between, please consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases and some classics. But now, let's jump right into it. This stars Cailee Spaeny as Lily, who transfers to a new school where she forms a friendship with three outcast girls, played by Gideon Adlon, Lovie Simone, and Zoey Luna, who are trying to form a coven of witches and looking for a fourth member. And as Lily gets closer to them, the coven is formed and the four begin conjuring spells against those that wrong them. If you saw my review of the original 1996 film The Craft, which I'll leave a link to in case you missed it, you'll know that's almost a copy and paste of the plot synopsis I gave for that film. While this is technically a sequel, it's also a loose remake of the original. The basic setup of a new girl transferring to a school and forming a coven of witches with three outcasts and performing a bunch of spells is pretty much the same, though from there they deviate substantially, which I'll get into. This is produced by Blumhouse, and it's written and directed by Zoey Lister-Jones, who made her feature-length directing debut in 2017 with a film called Band-Aid, which I haven't seen. I also really didn't have any expectations for this, to be honest. The first Craft is a cult classic and a lot of people love it, but somehow I only just heard of it when the trailer for this dropped a month ago and a lot of people were talking about it. It seemed like there was some uncertainty with this sequel because how could they top the original, but I had no attachment to it. I only just saw the original the other day before seeing this, and as far as this goes, it was fine. Very flawed, but fine. It's kind of what's expected when you revisit a classic movie, or especially a movie with a cult following so many years later. Most of the time, it's not going to be as good as the original, and while I enjoyed this, unfortunately, I don't think fans of the original are really going to feel the same way. From what I'm gathering so far, that appears to be the case. I have my criticisms for it, but I don't think they're exactly the same reasons why most other people don't seem to care for it. But let's start with the positives, because there are some legitimately enjoyable qualities to this that I was really on board with, and I don't want to be overlooked. Like the original, you once again have four solid lead performances. I thought all four actresses who made up the coven had great chemistry with each other, they played off one another very well, and I found their friendship believable. Though I wouldn't call them the most in-depth characters outside of Cailee Spaeny, who gives by far the best performance here. The reason she transferred to the new school is because her and her mom, who's played by Michelle Monaghan, are moving in with the mom's boyfriend, who's played by David Duchovny, and most of this is from her point of view. Unfortunately, as opposed to the original, where we see each of the four witches on their own and we learn a little bit about them, the other three are almost always seen together and their backstories are barely explored. The only reason we care for them was due to the fact that Lovie Simone, Zoey Luna, and Gideon Adlon are all very charismatic and are essentially what gave them such likable personalities. Like when they first realize Lily is their fourth, they're literally jumping for joy, and as they discuss after school how they're going to use their powers, they're very giddy over the possibilities that are in store for them. And I actually found it kind of sweet. So even though I knew nothing about them and I was disappointed by that, because the performances just exuded charisma, I was invested in these characters. As for the tone, whereas the first movie is really campy and over the top and there are all these cheesy special effects, this one feels a lot more restrained in that regard. For most of the movie, it scales back the special effects. While the four witches' main purpose is to stop bullies and things of that nature, we see a lot of that through a montage, and it'll usually be harmless things, like they get one to pee his pants while he's bothering someone else, and I thought that was pretty funny. And while this film isn't campy like the original, it still manages to incorporate bits of dark humor throughout, so I really appreciated that. The film mainly focuses on one particular instance of them using their powers. There's one bully named Timmy, who's played by Nicholas Galitzine, who they place a love spell on. He originally torments Lily when she arrives at the school, but after the spell is placed on him, he undergoes a total personality shift. He becomes a big advocate for social justice, he starts using words he never used before like heteronormative, and he becomes buddy-buddy with all four of the witches. The word you'll probably hear used most often to describe this movie is woke, mainly for this part of the story, and I think it'll be used as the film's main point of criticism by most people, especially because it leans into this more than its horror elements. And while I have criticisms of my own regarding this film, this is actually the one where I disagree with what most people seem to be saying about it, because I kind of liked how they did this. I thought Nicholas Galitzine gave a solid performance, and it offers a different kind of tension here that isn't just the witches going on another violent rampage with their powers like the original. David Duchovny's character is also a motivational speaker who really leans in on masculinity, and he has a speaking group at home that that involves his sons who are also friends with Timmy. And Timmy's new personality starts to drive a rift between him and the brothers, and it makes them uncomfortable. And I won't get into any spoilers as far as where this goes, but I appreciated the social commentary it offers. There seems to be a little bit of stigma when it comes to social commentary in films in general, even though it's been a thing in movies for a long time. People seem to just be picking up on it a lot more now, and at times seem to have a major problem with it. I do think that when it's done wrong, it can come off as kind of cringeworthy for being too on the nose, even if I agree with what's being said. But here, I found it done well. I said in my review of the first movie that The Craft was rare for its time, as it put women in a horror movie in a position of power. And in that case, it did it through a very campy, cheesy story. It was a very feminist film, and this built upon that and expanded it in a 2020 setting, exploring more of those dynamics. But it did so in a way that allowed it to differentiate itself from the first film. But this is still probably going to be the biggest point of contention for most viewers who really enjoy the original movie, because they may still find it too on the nose here. As far as this particular criticism goes, I think this was in a lose-lose situation regardless of what approach it took. If it essentially just did what the first movie did all over again, just with a new set of characters, it would have been criticized for being unoriginal and a rehash of the first movie. If it did something totally different, it would get criticized on the principle of simply not being the original. It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Normally with sequels, I'd say you should try keeping the tone consistent with what came before it, but also given the fact that it's an entirely new set of characters with completely different personalities, I think it's okay to deviate a little bit. They're not meant to be the same exact people as the characters from the original and should operate a bit differently. The spirit of the original is definitely there in some regards, but because these are characters with totally different personalities, there should be more freedom to do what they wish. So I commend this movie for doing something a bit different, and it made for an enjoyable, if flawed, first 2/3 of the movie. That all being said, where I think this film actually suffers the most is the final third. I think no matter what your thoughts are of this movie before this, the last act is what's really gonna make or break viewers. I won't spoil anything, but tonally, it pivots hard. While the first 2/3 had social commentary, it also offered it in a darkly humorous manner. However, the third act finds the movie taking itself way more seriously, and at first it was fine, because it still focused on the love potion storyline, and it started to build on it and gave some of the characters a little more depth, and it was here that the acting was at its best, and I was really getting into it. The film then suddenly shifts away from that story, and out of nowhere focuses on an entirely new conflict that was barely touched upon in the first 2/3. And not only is it very jarring, but it's never believable, because it'll force conflict out of something that had little to no foundation, so it takes you out of the moment. While I'm all for plot twists and sudden turns in movies, they still need to lay groundwork in order for the audience to go back and say, oh yeah, that makes sense, the clues were there all along, and now I realize it. And I didn't get that watching this. All I'll say is both Michelle Monaghan and David Duchovny play a bigger part in the last act. And I thought Michelle Monaghan was fine. I liked her chemistry with Cailee Spaeny, and she had as likable of a presence as the four main leads. David Duchovny, though, was unfortunately a mess. In general, I like him as an actor, and I originally liked the tension that was building between his sons and Timmy due to his role as a motivational speaker. But the direction they go with him in the final act, without spoiling anything, comes out of nowhere, and because of that, it feels very hokey and contrived. And even before that, the entire time, his performance is kind of bad. He really seemed disinterested the entire movie. His delivery is always monotone, no matter what the situation he's in. There's one scene where he'll make a dry, sarcastic joke, but in another scene, he tries to come off as stern, and he uses the same type of delivery. And I couldn't take him seriously after a while. Like I said, he's a solid actor in general, but this might just be the worst performance I've seen of his. And in the end, all this results in an uneven experience. I actually liked the first 2/3 of this, despite my issues. I really did. But the third act just drops so hard in terms of quality, with a finale that wraps things up a little too quickly, that it really drags the movie down for me. Honestly, I think even a lot of people who didn't take issue with the first 2/3 may be totally turned off by the last act. This is a mixed bag. It's very, very uneven. I don't think many people who are longtime fans of the original are really gonna like this. As someone who only just saw the original, I can say I enjoyed the first 2/3 of it. It was flawed, but because it was humorous and also seemed like it had something to say, it was fine. The last 2/3 though is really bad. The difference in quality is incredibly noticeable, and anyone who was on the fence already may be turned off completely by the ending. It just pivots to an entirely new direction. It has some truly bad acting from David Duchovny, and its tone is completely different from those first 2/3. So it's extremely jarring. For me personally, because I legitimately enjoyed the first 2/3 of the movie, I'll say the good just outweighed the bad. Though I don't think a lot of people will have that same perspective, especially because a bad ending can totally tank a movie. So I'm gonna give this a somewhat positive score because of what I liked, but I'd say proceed with caution with this, and the first is by far better. The Craft Legacy gets a 6.5 out of 10. So let me know, did you see The Craft Legacy, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like the different direction it took, and did you enjoy it more or less than the first movie? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll catch you next time.